Welcome to Executive Edge interview series. I'm Nora Paxton, CEO coach, leadership strategist, and advisor to founders and senior executive. I help leaders think bigger, lead more intentionally, and create lasting organizational impact. And today we're diving into a conversation that I've genuinely been looking forward to. My guest is someone who thinks deeply about leadership, not just as a set of behaviors, but as a way of being. Steve Fowler. He's a leadership strategist, author of Stealth, A Way of Being, and the creator of Clarity Framework, which has already influenced many leaders across industry who are navigating complexity and trying to show up with more purpose. Steve has a rare ability to distill leadership down to its essence. His work helps leaders get back to the fundamental: clarity, alignment, resilience, intentionality, trust, and ultimately measure their impact in a much more meaningful way. So today we're going to explore the philosophy behind Stealth, why this book needed to be written now, and how modern leaders can shift from reacting to leading with presence and precision. Steve, thank you for being here.
Wow, Nora, thank you very much. That was a great, probably a, a bigger introduction than I expected. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. Let's jump right in. So, Steve, what led you to the idea of stealth as a way of being, and what made this the right moment in your journey and career to write this book?
Much of it was growth. And before I wrote the book Stealth, it was a concept. It was a concept that actually came from you. It's an idea that came from you. And I want to thank you for that because without your nudging, I wouldn't have taken that first step. But before Stealth became a concept, it was my survival mechanism. I didn't name it until much, much later. And stealth began long before I gave it a name. It was a, it was me as a kid moving between countries and culture, and I learned to blend in before I learned to speak up. I watched, I listened, I adjusted myself to feel safe. The pattern carried forward into my adult life and career. I used it to survive, then to be accepted, then to succeed. Everything changed when I realized I was shaping my identity around survival instead of purpose. Stealth sort of became a way to understand myself, my patterns, and challenged it, and then shifted forward towards a presence over protection.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you for actually being engaging in this process. So
Thank you.
you start by refining leadership from the inside out. How did you redefine leadership, and where did this concept originally emerge from for you?
Well, I noticed that I was copying every leader out there. I
Mm.
was an imposter. I was suffering from his imposter syndrome. I needed to stop running, and I sort of created as a kid in my own sort of kid-like playbook, built on fear, built on old biases, built on things that weren't really real. And then I reached a point where the old habits had to stop, and stopping them helped me. I had a title and teams and outcomes, yet something felt just unfinished. I wanted to understand myself rather than performing versions of myself. I when I wrote the book, it forced me to sit with my story and own it. I don't know how else to describe it, but I wrote it because I I I hadn't mastered anything, right? I wrote it because I was learning to return to myself, and that was
Mm.
key.
Powerful. So you've worked with leader across the industry. Was there a specific moment when you realized something essential was missing, something leaders weren't seeing or accessing?
You know, you ever um, put yourself in a well, let's put ourselves into an organization, for example.
Mm.
Let's call it a medium or size organization. And let's think about the vision that comes in from the top, whether it's the board of directors, whether it's the mission statement, whether it's the executive that X, Y, and Z. And then I think the interesting part is if you go into leadership at the lowest level, medium level, and even the finite individual that just came in yesterday as a new employee. And how do they respond to this new vision, to this new company? Is leadership clear? Is their understanding of
Mm,
what's clear in that role? And this is the blind spot. This is where if a top leader doesn't go and understand the organization or take the time to understand the organization, this is where the limits fall short. This is where blind spots are created. And guess what? Most of our visions, most of our leadership
yeah.
opportunities are repeated year over year because it's not clear to everyone.
That's so true, Steve. And so, one of the most compelling ideas in your book is what happens when a leader is operating out of stealth. So, what does that look like in practice?
You know, first of all, the book Stealth created the context for my later discovery. And that context was how I needed to protect myself, how
Mm,
I needed to protect myself from, I don't know, scary people.
hmm
And those scary people were um, leaders of different titles or uh, leaders with different ego levels. Um, and we all create this fragmentation, this model of stealthing, if you will, where we hide behind a persona. We hide behind something that we don't really believe in ourselves. We lose our purpose. We lose our identity as a result. And that happens every day, almost all the time.
Yeah, that's so true. You know what I appreciate the most, Steve, about your approach is that it's not just philosophical. You've built a framework that leaders can actually use to navigate complexity and make better decisions. And your clarity framework breaks leadership into 7 core elements that are really simple but incredibly powerful when leaders practice them intentionally. So, walk me through the framework. I'd like to talk through the framework. Let's talk about clarity,
Yeah.
which is the foundation. What does true clarity look like in leadership?
Sure. Clarity, I break it down into a framework, as you mentioned, but it's also an acronym, right? Clarity, the letter C, the letter L, the letter A, the letter C for clarity, L for leadership, A for alignment, R for resilience, I for intent, trust, and then Y for yield. And these are all elements that I think we just need to pause and think about. And so for me, it came out of the book when I paused and realized what I needed to become a better leader, to be more effective as a leader, to make sure my message and my communication improved, my articulation of the vision improved. So clarity is when your vision, decisions, and actions match. You know what you want, right? Why it matters and how to move forward. You help your team understand their role in that direction as well. Clarity gives people more confidence. It removes confusion and noise.
Let's talk about leadership L, the letter L that stands for leadership. You make a strong distinction between leaders who influence and leaders who rely on authority. So, what separates the two?
Yeah, so, you know, I've worn both versions of leadership. The only one that builds trust, however, is when trust through their actions are actually heard. There is a hearing when you act. It's not always said, but when you truly lead and lead through action, this is where it really sticks, right?
Mm.
Influential leaders earn their trust through their actors. They listen through their actions, excuse me, and they listen. They model calm thinking. They don't overreact. They show care and they show direction. Leaders who depend on authority also push for results not through pressure, but through influence that outlasts authority every single time.
You're so spot on. I mean, I've seen it in my practice, I've seen it every day. And so that leads me to alignment A for alignment. So, as you know, misalignment is a silent cost in so many organizations. So, what's one practical way leaders can diagnose misalignment early before it becomes a performance problem?
Yeah. That's a good question. Ask your team. This is just from my heart. You have to ask your team to explain
Mm,
your vision back to you. When you ask people to explain that goal or the goals in their own words, the alignment is not what you say, it's what your team hears and believes. That's when interpretation varies and alignment starts to break down, if
mm,
not.
yeah. So let's talk about resilience, the letter R in
Mm.
your clarity. You talked about the resilience mindset shift. From your perspective, Steve, what do resilient leader do differently in moments of uncertainty, especially those moments that we're living in today?
Yeah, sometimes we fail to stop and observe. And observation comes in many forms. It's not just through your eyes, it's through active listening as well. But when you pause around that person or that group of people, pushes them to react. What we also want is people to respond, not just to
Mm,
react. When you breathe, take a breathe, and it's not the physical breath, although it might be the physical breath. You then intentionally slow down. Then you anchor the team by being more steady as a result. You
mm.
speak more honestly, without any panic or adding any panic. There's consistency in your tone, your voice, and the brand of your vision.
What about intentionality for the letter I? In today's environment, it's really incredibly easy for leaders to become reactive, as you know.
Yes.
So, what distinguish an intentional leader from a reactive one?
Yeah, intentional leaders don't let pressure replace purpose. That's an important delineation, only because when we're under pressure, we oftentimes lose what our purpose was intended to be. So
Mhm.
intentional leaders act with purpose. They speak with purpose. Their choice of words are careful. They tie actions across long-term direction and short-term direction. Um, Reactive leaders move fast without really reflecting, and that's
Mhm.
dangerous. You feel the difference when and in how we respond under pressure. But when we reflect under pressure, or take the time to be reflective under pressure, purpose comes through.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when we think about trust, and you teach the trust triangle, transparency, consistency, empathy, which part do leaders struggle with the most from your perspective and why?
Yeah, that's a good question. When leaders vary in their responses to trust, or to stress, sorry, trust shifts because we as individuals hang on to words much more than we realize. And if we recognize that we are shifting under stress, then our trust also shifts. And then that
Mm,
inconsistency builds this flavor of unreliability in terms of our tone or our leadership. And that reliability then uh, breaks connections, which we desperately seek unknowingly sometimes.
yeah, absolutely. So finally, yield. This is where leaders really evaluate their impact. So how should leaders measure their lasting impact?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest answer to that is the best measurement is someone who grows because you were part of
Mm,
their story, right?
yeah.
You Because then they align better with you. If you go up the stack of clarity and all the other acronyms, you will see that this lasting impact really has a better resonance across the board. That impact then shows up um, when continuity is important, after you step away. Um, the people grow and they help others grow. They help others see your vision. They see your objectives and your goals. The systems then start to work really well. Um, and then the clarity starts to remain. And if the clarity isn't there, they're not
Mm,
afraid to come back and ask you for more. And that yield then measures the longer term strength, and it becomes a high performant individual and not a short term applause, right?
yeah. So the clarity framework, the way I see it, is really gives leader a structure. But
Yes.
as you know, the world leaders operating today is shifting really fast. AI, hybrid work, new expectation around leadership presence. So I'd like to zoom out for a moment, Steve, and talk about leadership in the context of what's happening right now.
Yeah.
What is, from your perspective, the biggest leadership blind spot you see today?
We live in a hybrid world, much more than, than we did just 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago for that matter. So leaders somewhat underestimate how much people can sense that misalignment because of being displaced in a different location or just being in a different location, not necessarily displaced. But leaders misunderstand or even underestimate how much people sense that, right? And sense that misalignment because they get a 15-minute Zoom call or 30-minute Zoom call and they're supposed to understand what that longer term vision really is.
Mm.
When teams notice that disconnect, you get a loss of productivity, you get a loss of attention, you get confusion or doubt that creeps in, and people really, really start to feel that.
Absolutely. And this is where, things start to break down and, motivation, inspiration is becoming a big issue. So looking ahead, what does the next generation leaders need to master that wasn't required a decade ago?
So, as I alluded to, human complexity is
Yeah.
a simple answer. You cannot lead through a structure alone, right? You can't just have a PowerPoint and call it good anymore. They need presence. Uh, they need presence even across distance. Remote and hybrid cultures demand more clarity, if not anything else. And that clarity is not just in your vision, but of identity. How do they feel about the work that they're doing? How is it clear enough for them to get up in the morning and feel like they can come in and do what they need to do? So
Mm.
it develops a culture, and that culture then demands not only clarity, but clarity of strategy as well. So leaders have to connect without proximity. Don't assume that just because you've talked to them over Zoom, you've influenced them properly, and you have assessed their skills with the technical acumen that you thought you had.
So if you had to distill leadership down to one essential skill, one thing a leader must get right, what would it be?
Yeah, like you mentioned earlier, if you zoom out of clarity, clarity really is about being present. How often are one-on-ones set up where the manager or the leader might be scrolling on their phone or reading email while they're trying to conduct their one-on-one? Well, that's not really giving them the presence that they need, or the presence you need as a leader, because you might infer some details from that conversation, and that's important for your own leadership as well. So presence is the key. You cannot influence an individual or a room if you're not fully in, right? Presence sharpens the judgment, it sharpens listening, and it definitely sharpens alignment.
So speaking of presence, and you talk a lot also of grounded leadership, how can leader cultivate presence in high pressure environments?
Yeah, slow your pace.
Yeah.
Slow your pace before you speak. Your team will feel the difference. Your individual contributors will feel the difference.
Hmm.
When you slow your pace, deciding nothing is in a rush, right? Take a breath before you answer, anchor yourself in the outcome you want, and then presence will grow when you train yourself to respond and not.
So I like to ask this question. I will try to ask it at the end of every interviews that I have. What advice would you give leaders who feel stretched, thin, or unclear about who they're becoming?
Yeah. Remember, and this attribute I think is something that could be leveraged by both leaders and individual contributors, senior people, junior people, entry level folks as well. And that is, your identity does not need to be rebuilt. It just needs to be remembered. Getting back to your core values, removing that removes the noise. Um, Simplify the commitments. Get clear on those commitments. You don't need a new identity. You just need to remember that you were lost trying to meet every expectation. Clarity shows up when you remove what does not belong.
I love it. Clarity removes what does not belong. I love this one. Steve, this has been an incredibly grounding and clarifying conversation.
Thank
Your
you.
work gives leaders language and structure for navigating leadership with more intention and more humanity. So before we wrap up, I'll have two final questions for you. If leader could take just one step towards greater clarity today, what would it be?
Ask yourself one question. What do I truly want to move forward with right now?
Okay. And where can people go to learn more about your work, the Clarity Framework, or connect with you directly?
I appreciate that, Nora, very much. People can reach me on LinkedIn. They can also visit me on stevefowler.me. I share my thoughts, my mistakes, my lessons, the frameworks that are being shaped. Not only a link to my book, but also the Clarity Framework and a series that I'm going to be publishing over time.
I just can't wait.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you to everyone tuning in. This has been the Executive Edge interview series. I'm Nora Paxton, helping leaders think bigger, lead more intentionally, and create lasting organizational impact. Until next time, lead with clarity and purpose.